Greetings dear friends and welcome once more to this channel. This is 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐩𝐸 from Afro-Evolution Company. In this tutorial, I'm going to be guiding you on how to code an analog clock using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Before we get started, if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. Before we get into the coding part of this project, there are certain concepts or methods that we have to know. The first method is the move to method that defines the position of the drawing cursor onto the canvas. The second method is the line to method that is used to define the coordinate of the line's endpoint. The next method is the stroke method, which is used to make the line visible. And then we are equally going to talk about the arc method, which is used to draw an arc. For the syntax of the arc method, we have context.arc, and then we have the following parameters in it: center of x, center of y, radius, starting angle, ending angle, and the counterclockwise angle. Another important method that we will certainly make use of is the rec method. So the rec method is used to create rectangle and square shapes. This method requires 4 parameters, which are its x coordinate, y coordinate, its width, and the height. To draw a circle using the syntax context.arc, then with the parameters, the x center, the y center, the radius, 0.2 times math.pi, and then the last parameter false. Other important methods are we have the stroke style, the line width, and the fill style. So what are the purpose of the stroke style method, the line width method, and the fill style method? Yeah, you have to note that the color and width of the stroke is set using the stroke style and the line width property. The fill style method is used to fill the color inside a canvas or inside this canvas shape. Then lastly, we are going to talk about gradients and types. Essentially, we have 2 main types of gradients, which are the linear and radial gradient. Before we get further, what do we mean by gradient? A gradient is defined as a smooth visual transition from one color to another. And as I said earlier, we have 2 main types of gradient, linear and radial gradient. If we want to apply a linear gradient, the syntax is context.create linear gradient with the parameter start x, start y, nx, and ny. That is, we are specifying where we want our gradient to start on the x-axis, the y-axis, and where it should end on the x-axis and the y-axis. Finally, for the radial gradient, the syntax is context.create radial gradient with the parameter start x, start y, start radius, nx, ny, and radius, which specifies where we want to start our radial gradient on the xy axis, the radius at which we want to start, the x and y axis at which we want to end the gradient, and finally the n radius, which is specified where we want to end our gradient on the radius of the sphere. Remember that for the linear and radial gradient, we assigned it to a variable called var_grad, which stands for gradient. So with this, we have all the basic concepts that we need in order to code our analog clock. So now we are going to move to the coding part of our project. We are going to start with this basic structure, which is already set up for us. So before I proceed, I will start by creating two other folders. I'm going to proceed by creating two new folders. A CSS folder and a JavaScript folder. Then I'm going to move back here. Okay. So in HTML, to create 2D graphics, we make use of what we call the 2D Canva. So the 2D Canva is popular for building 2D games and animations. Nevertheless, the logic and behavior of the graphics is defined by using JavaScript. So we are going to start by and we'll specify the width of our Canva. Here I will use 640. Okay, that is it. Okay. So next I'm going to move to check if the link for my CSS is there. In my CSS folder, I'm going to create a CSS file which I'm going to name style.css. In my JavaScript folder, I'm going to create a file called script.js. Okay. So I'm doing that because my CSS file is in the folder. So I'm doing this because my CSS file style.css is in the folder CSS. And if I move down, you will see that my JavaScript file script.js is in the folder JS. So I'll come back here. JS. And here. CSS. Okay. Next, I'm going to move to my JavaScript file where I'm going to start by defining a variable called Canva. And I will assign it I will define another variable called context. And I will assign Remember that I said that to access the Canva element in our HTML file, we use document.getElement by ID. You have to note that, or you remember that in our HTML file, we specified the ID there. After we have done that, we are going to use the second line of code, which is used to define a 2D Canva context by passing 2D into the getContext method of the 𝐒𝐮𝐩 object. When we have done these two things, the next we need to define a variable center x, which here I'm going to assign then the radius. Now that we have declared these three variables, we'll proceed by creating the function that will be used to draw our outer clock cycle and our inner clock cycle. So I'm going to call that function draw clock phase. So we have the only method that I have used there, which I have not talked about, is the begin path method. So the begin path method begins a path or resets the current path of an act. So with that, we can move to coding the inner clock cycle. Okay, we have coded inner clock cycle. Let's save and see what we have. So at this point, it's still showing nothing. So moving back to Visual Studio Code, let's get back again to our draw clock phase. Here I'm going to declare another function called draw clock. And in this function, I'm going to invoke my draw clock phase. Save it again. Nothing. So let's proceed. So at this point in time, we have not had a cycle, that is our outer clock cycle and inner clock cycle showing. So I'm going to move back to draw clock phase, and here I'm going to add so I've added another line of code where I'm using a declare rec method. The clear rec method is used to clear specified pixel on the 𝐒𝐮𝐩. Now that we have done that, we are going to move to okay. So here I have used the add color stop property. This property or method is used to specify a color and position in a gradient object. In other words, I'm trying to say that the add color stop method specify a color and position in a gradient object. So you can see that at the level of these two lines of code, we have to specify our position and the color, position and the color. Sorry, this line of code. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do in our draw clock face function is that so I have added two other method, which is the shadow blur method and the shadow color method or properties. So the shadow blur property of this canvas. So the shadow blur property is used to specify the amount of blur that we want to apply to our shadow. And the shadow color property or method is used to specify the color we want to add to our shadow. Let me save. So before we test what we have done, remember that we need to call our draw clock function here. So I'm going to call draw clock. Okay. Okay. So let's test and see what we have at this point. Good. So you can see that here we are having our outer circle and our inner circle as expected. So the next thing I'm going to do, I will move into my CSS file. I am going to center my clock. So to do that, I'm going to apply some style to the body, align items, center to, and finally the margin. Apply 0 all around. Let me test. Okay. So our clock shape is now centered. Let's move back to JavaScript. Now that we are done with the clock face, we are going to proceed by adding the clock numbers. To do that, I'm going to declare another function called so yeah, to draw the clock numbers, we have used for our different method. We have used the font method to specify the font size and type, the field type or the text align, and the text baseline. Then we are going to proceed by using a for loop. Okay, so this line of code is used in order to fill the clock with its different numbers, starting from 1 to 12. So here we had to declare a variable called angle, where we assign to it I times 30 minus 90 in bracket times math.pi divided by 180. Remember that here we are trying to convert, or we are trying to have our angle in radian. And these other two lines of code are used to adjust for better spacing or for appropriate spacing between the numbers that will show up on a clock. So the last thing I'm going to do for our draw clock numbers function will be, I will need to reset. I'm going to use context. Okay. For the number to be visible, I will need to invoke my draw clock number here. Okay. So let's see what we have. Okay. So you can see that we have our numbers on our clock. Good. The next thing we will need to do in this project is to draw the hands of our clock. To draw the hands of our clock, we will need to define another function, or we will need to create another function, which we will call this function draw hand. So let's declare draw hand. And our draw hand function will have these parameters: the length of the hand, the length of the hand, the angle, the width of the hand, and the color of the hand. In our draw hand function, we have added another method called the line cap method. Line cap method is used to specify the cap style of the line we are drawing. And generally, the line cap method generally have three main properties, which are round, square, and berg. The next thing I'm going to want to reset. Then I want to move the hands to the center. Lastly, I'm going to move to my function draw clock. In the draw clock function, that is where I'm going to code or any other thing that's left. Remember that here we have created the draw hand function with 4 parameters, and we wrote some code under it. So for this code to actually work, we will need to invoke the draw hand function in the draw clock function. And before we invoke that, there's a number of things that we need to do. So let's start by declaring another variable called now. I'll assign it new date. After we have done this, we will need to convert our second angle, minute angle, and hour angle to radian. Paste it back. So finally, I can now draw the clock. So I'm going to invoke my draw hands. So let me get back to this code. Remember that these lines of code is to convert the second or the minute and the hour angle to gradient or into gradient. These lines of code is to specify the length of the clock hands. This line of code is to get the actual time or date, and then these lines of code is used to declare our second, minute, and hours taking into consideration the actual time. So let's save it and test and see what we have. Nothing. Let's get back there. So you can now see that our clock hands are showing, as you can see here. So finally, for us to complete our clock project, we need to add some motion to the clock hands. So to do that, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. Actually, there are two ways of doing that, but yeah, I am going to first of all show you how to do that using set intervals. So you can see now that our clock is working perfectly. Another way to do this, let's get back to Visual Studio Code. I could declare a function called update clock, for example. Then I'm going to invoke my draw clock. I'm using request animation frame. Then now I'm going to invoke or call my update clock function here. So you can see that both ways are working. So thank you once more for watching this video. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.